Welcome to Lifelong Echoes. I am your narrator. Today, we will journey through the incredible life of one of history's greatest leaders. His name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, but the world came to know him as Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma means great soul in the ancient language of Sanskrit. This is the story of a small, quiet boy who became a giant of human history, a man who brought down an empire without firing a single shot, a leader who changed the world through the power of truth and nonviolence. His life teaches us that one person, armed with courage and compassion, can transform the entire world. Our story begins on October 2nd, 1869, in the small coastal town of Porbandar on the western shore of India. A baby boy was born. His parents were Karamchand Gandhi and Putlibai Gandhi. They named their son Mohandas. Little Mohandas was not different from other children. He was shy and quiet. He was often scared of the dark. He was afraid of ghosts and spirits. He did not like to be alone. But inside this small, frightened boy lived a spirit that would one day shake the foundations of the mighty British Empire. Mohandas grew up in a loving but strict household. His father, Karamchand, was the chief minister of Porbandar. This made their family important and respected, but his father was also known for his honesty and fairness. These qualities would deeply influence young Mohandas. His mother, Putlibai, was deeply religious. Every day, she would pray and fast. She taught Mohandas about truth, compassion, and nonviolence toward all living beings. She would tell him ancient stories from Hindu scriptures, stories about kings who gave up their wealth for truth, stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things through courage and kindness. One story particularly fascinated young Mohandas. It was about King Harishchandra. This king lost his kingdom, his family, and his wealth. He was sold into slavery. But through all his suffering, he never told a single lie. Even in his darkest moments, he chose truth over comfort. This story planted a powerful seed in young Mohandas's mind, the seed of absolute honesty. When Mohandas was 7 years old, his family moved to Rajkot. This was a bigger town with better schools. Here, young Mohandas began his formal education. He studied reading, writing, mathematics, and history. He was an average student, neither brilliant nor poor, but he was curious about everything around him. As a child, Mohandas was very observant. He noticed how people treated each other differently based on their caste, religion, or wealth. He saw beggars on the streets and rich people in palaces. He wondered why there was so much inequality in the world. These early observations would later shape his fight for justice. But Mohandas was not perfect. Like many children, he made mistakes. When he was in high school, he once stole a small piece of gold from his brother's jewelry. He wanted money to pay a debt. But after stealing, guilt consumed him completely. For weeks, the guilt ate away at him. He could not sleep properly. He could not concentrate on his studies. Finally, he could not bear it anymore. He decided to confess everything to his father. Mohandas wrote a detailed confession letter. In the letter, he admitted his crime. He also promised never to steal again. He asked his father to punish him as he saw fit. Then, with trembling hands, he gave the letter to his father and waited. His father read the letter slowly and carefully. Mohandas expected anger, shouting, perhaps even physical punishment. But something completely unexpected happened. Instead of getting angry, his father began to cry. Tears rolled down his face as he tore up the letter. His father's tears taught Mohandas a lesson he would never forget. Truth was more powerful than lies. Honesty could touch hearts in ways that deception never could. Love and forgiveness were stronger than anger and punishment. This moment changed Mohandas forever. As Mohandas grew older, he became more aware of the political situation in India. His country was ruled by the British Empire. Indians had very few rights in their own land. They were treated as second-class citizens. British laws favored British people. Indian voices were rarely heard or respected. Young Mohandas watched this injustice with growing concern. He wanted to help his people, but he was still just a teenager. He decided that education was the key. If he became a lawyer, he could use the law to fight for Indian rights. When Mohandas was 18 years old, his family made a bold decision. They would send him to London to study law. This was expensive and risky. London was thousands of miles away, in the heart of the British Empire. The weather, food, and culture were completely different from India. On September 4th, 1888, Mohandas said goodbye to his young wife, Kasturba, and their newborn baby. He boarded a ship at Bombay port. As the ship moved away from the Indian coast, Mohandas felt scared and excited at the same time. He was leaving behind everything familiar, but he was moving toward his destiny. The journey to London took more than 3 weeks. During those long days at sea, Mohandas had time to think deeply. He thought about his family back in India. He thought about his country's problems. He made promises to himself. He would study hard. He would learn everything possible about law and justice. And someday, he would return to help free his people. London in 1888 was the center of the world's largest empire. It was a city of incredible contrasts. Magnificent palaces stood next to dirty slums. Rich merchants rode in fancy carriages, while poor children begged for food on the streets. For young Mohandas, this was his first real encounter with extreme inequality. At first, London was overwhelming. The weather was cold and constantly rainy. The food was strange and flavorless compared to Indian cuisine. People spoke English very fast, with accents Mohandas had never heard. He felt lonely and homesick. Many times he wanted to give up and return to India immediately. But Mohandas was determined to succeed. He had made promises to his family and to himself. He enrolled at the Inner Temple, one of London's most prestigious law schools. He studied English law, international law, and legal procedures with intense dedication. However, his real education happened outside the classroom. In London, Mohandas met people from all over the world. He made friends with students from Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Through these friendships, he learned about different religions, philosophies, and ways of thinking about life. He read books about Christianity and was particularly moved by Jesus' teachings about love, forgiveness, and helping the poor. He studied Buddhism and learned about compassion and the middle path. He explored Islam and admired its emphasis on equality and brotherhood. All these teachings enriched his understanding of universal human values. But the book that changed his life forever was an ancient Indian text called the Bhagavad Gita. Ironically, Mohandas first read this Hindu scripture in London, translated into English. The Gita taught about duty, righteousness, and the path to spiritual enlightenment. The Gita introduced Mohandas to the concept of dharma, doing the right thing even when it is difficult or dangerous. It taught him about ahimsa, non-violence toward all living beings. Most importantly, it introduced him to the idea of satyagraha, holding firmly to truth no matter the consequences. During his 3 years in London, Mohandas also discovered Western philosophy and literature. He read the works of John Ruskin, Leo Tolstoy, and Henry David Thoreau. These writers taught him about simple living, social justice, and peaceful resistance to unjust laws. Slowly, all these different ideas began to form a new philosophy in Mohandas's mind. He began to believe that truth and non-violence were the most powerful forces in the universe, more powerful than armies, more powerful than weapons, more powerful than hatred or revenge. In June 1891, after 3 years of intensive study, Mohandas passed his law examinations. He was now a qualified barrister. He was excited and nervous about returning to India to begin his legal career. But life had very different plans for the young lawyer. When Mohandas arrived back in India in 1891, he received terrible news. His beloved mother had died while he was in London. The family had not told him because they did not want to disturb his studies. This loss devastated Mohandas, but it also strengthened his resolve to make his mother proud through his actions. Mohandas tried to establish a law practice in Bombay, but he faced serious problems. Despite his London education, he was extremely nervous in court. When he tried to speak, his voice would shake uncontrollably. His hands would tremble. Sometimes he would forget his arguments completely and sit down in embarrassment. Other lawyers laughed at him behind his back. Clients lost confidence in his abilities. His legal career seemed doomed before it had properly started. Mohandas began to doubt himself and his abilities. He wondered if he had made a terrible mistake by becoming a lawyer. Then, in April 1893, something happened that would change not just his life, but the course of history. An Indian trading company offered Mohandas a job in South Africa. They needed a lawyer to represent them in a complicated legal case. The job would last 1 year and pay very well. Mohandas accepted the offer immediately. He saw it as an escape from his failures in India and an opportunity to gain experience. On April 24, 1893, he arrived in Durban, South Africa. He was 24 years old and hopeful about his future. But South Africa would test him in ways he had never imagined. Mohandas' first shock came immediately upon arrival in Durban. At the immigration office, officials told him to remove his turban. They said Indians were not allowed to wear traditional dress in public buildings. Mohandas politely but firmly refused. This was his first small act of resistance, though he did not realize its significance at the time. A few days later, Mohandas had to travel by train from Durban to Pretoria for his legal case. His employers had bought him a first-class ticket, as befitted a qualified lawyer. But when the train reached Pietermaritzburg station, a white passenger complained about sharing the compartment with an Indian. The train conductor ordered Mohandas to move to the third-class compartment, which was dirty and uncomfortable. Mohandas showed his first-class ticket and explained that he had every right to travel first class. He had paid the full fare and was properly dressed and educated. But the conductor did not care about tickets or rights or education. He only saw the color of Mohandas's skin. He called the police, who dragged Mohandas off the train. They threw his luggage onto the platform. The train departed, leaving him stranded in the cold night. Mohandas spent that entire night in the waiting room of Pietermaritzburg railway station. He was cold, hungry, and humiliated. But more than that, he was angry. Not just angry for himself, but angry for all the Indians who faced such discrimination every day. That night, sitting alone in that cold, dark waiting room, Mohandas made a life-changing decision. He would not just fight for his own rights. He would fight for the rights of all Indian people in South Africa. He would use his legal training, but he would also use something more powerful, the force of truth and justice. The next morning, Mohandas continued his journey to Pretoria, but he was no longer the same person. The shy, nervous lawyer was gone. In his place was a man with a mission, a man who would spend the next 21 years in South Africa, developing the methods that would eventually free India from British rule. In Pretoria, Mohandas quickly finished his legal work, but instead of returning to India, he decided to stay in South Africa. He began organizing the Indian community to fight against discriminatory laws. He held meetings, wrote letters to newspapers, and filed legal cases. But most importantly, he began to develop his philosophy of satyagraha, which means truth force or holding firmly to truth. Satyagraha was completely different from ordinary protest or rebellion. It was not about violence, hatred, or revenge. It was about changing hearts and minds through the power of truth and self-sacrifice. The principles of Satyagraha were simple but revolutionary. First, the cause must be just and true. Second, the means must be pure and nonviolent. Third, the satyagrahi must be willing to suffer for their beliefs without causing suffering to others. Fourth, there should be no hatred toward opponents, only love and respect for their humanity. Mohandas organized his first major satyagraha campaign in 1906. The South African government had passed the Black Act, requiring all Indians to carry special identity cards at all times. The cards had fingerprints, like those used for criminals. The law was deeply humiliating and discriminatory. Mohandas called on all Indians to refuse to register for these cards. Thousands of people joined the protest. They burned their identity cards in huge public bonfires. They willingly went to jail rather than obey what they considered an unjust law. Mohandas himself was arrested multiple times. He spent many months in prison, often in harsh conditions. But instead of complaining, he used his time in jail to read, write, and think. He emerged from each imprisonment stronger and more determined than before. The Satyagraha movement in South Africa grew stronger each year. Indians from all backgrounds, rich and poor, Hindu and Muslim, educated and uneducated, joined together in peaceful resistance. Women participated alongside men. Children supported their parents' struggle for dignity and rights. The world began to take notice. Newspapers in India, Britain, and other countries wrote about the brave Indians in South Africa. People everywhere were inspired by this new form of resistance. It was powerful but peaceful. It was strong but nonviolent. It was revolutionary but respectful of human dignity. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and negotiation, the South African government finally agreed to major concessions. In 1913, they repealed many of the most discriminatory laws. Indians gained significant civil rights. It was a great victory for justice and human dignity. More importantly, it proved that Satyagraha worked. A small community of Indians had forced a powerful government to change unjust laws. They had done it without violence, without hatred, without destroying property. They had won through the sheer power of truth, courage, and moral authority. During his years in South Africa, people began calling Mohandas Mahatma, meaning great soul. The title was first used by the great Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. It reflected not just respect, but recognition that this man had become something special. He had become a symbol of truth, courage, and hope for oppressed people everywhere. In July 1915, after 21 transformative years in South Africa, Mahatma Gandhi returned to India. He was no longer the shy, inexperienced young man who had left. He was now a tested leader with a proven method for fighting injustice. More importantly, he had learned that ordinary people, when united by truth and moral purpose, could defeat even the mightiest oppressor. India, in 1915, was seething with discontent against British rule. The British had been ruling India for over 150 years. They had exploited India's resources, destroyed local industries, and treated Indians as inferiors in their own country. Many Indians wanted independence, but they disagreed on how to achieve it. Some leaders advocated violent revolution. They believed that the British would only leave India through force. Others preferred to work within the British system, hoping for gradual reforms. Gandhi proposed a third way, mass, nonviolent resistance that would make it impossible for the British to continue ruling India. Gandhi's first major campaign in India was the Champaran Satyagraha in 1917. In the Champaran district of Bihar, British landlords were forcing Indian farmers to grow indigo instead of food crops. The farmers were paid almost nothing for their indigo, while the landlords made huge profits. When local farmers asked Gandhi for help, he traveled to Champaran to investigate. The British authorities ordered him to leave immediately, but Gandhi refused. He was arrested, but thousands of farmers gathered to support him. Faced with this mass support, the authorities released him and allowed him to conduct his investigation. Gandhi's investigation exposed the terrible exploitation of the farmers. The British government was forced to pass laws protecting farmers' rights and reducing the taxes they had to pay. It was Gandhi's first victory in India, and it established him as a champion of the poor and oppressed. In 1919, the British passed the Rowlatt Act, which allowed them to imprison Indians without trial. Gandhi called for a nationwide hartal, a day of fasting, prayer, and complete shutdown of business. Millions of Indians participated, showing the power of united, non-violent resistance. However, the movement sometimes turned violent, despite Gandhi's emphasis on nonviolence. The worst incident occurred in Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar, where British General Dyer ordered his soldiers to fire on a peaceful gathering. Nearly 400 people were killed and over 1,000 wounded. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre shocked Gandhi and all of India. It showed the true face of British rule, willing to use any level of violence to maintain control. But instead of calling for revenge, Gandhi called for more disciplined nonviolence. He believed that hatred would only breed more hatred. In 1920, Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement. He asked all Indians to boycott British goods, schools, courts, and government jobs. Millions of people joined this peaceful rebellion. They spun their own cloth instead of buying British textiles. They created their own schools and courts. They refused to participate in the British system. Gandhi himself gave up his Western clothes and began wearing simple, hand-spun cloth. He lived simply, ate simple food, and owned almost nothing. His lifestyle showed that independence meant not just political freedom, but also economic and spiritual freedom from materialism and greed. The British were confused and frustrated by this form of resistance. They could fight armies, but how do you fight people who simply refuse to cooperate? How do you rule people who will not accept your authority? Gandhi had discovered a form of power that the British Empire had never encountered before. In 1930, Gandhi launched perhaps his most famous campaign, the Salt Satyagraha. The British had a monopoly on salt production and sale in India. Indians were forbidden from making their own salt, even though salt was essential for life and could be easily made from seawater. Gandhi saw the salt tax as a symbol of everything wrong with British rule. It was a tax on the poor for something as basic as salt. It made criminals out of people who wanted to make salt for their own families. It was unjust, exploitative, and insulting to human dignity. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi began a 240-mile march from his ashram in Ahmedabad to the coastal village of Dandi. He was 61 years old, but he walked steadily for 24 days. Along the way, thousands of people joined the march. Newspapers around the world reported on this extraordinary protest. On April 6th, Gandhi reached the sea at Dandi. He picked up a handful of salt from the beach, symbolically breaking the British salt law. This simple act sparked a nationwide campaign of civil disobedience. Across India, millions of people began making their own salt. The British arrested over 60,000 people, including Gandhi himself. But the arrests only made the movement stronger. For every person arrested, 10 more joined the resistance. The world watched in amazement as an entire nation united in peaceful defiance of imperial power. The Salt March became a turning point in India's freedom struggle. It showed the world that Indians were united in their desire for independence. It demonstrated the power of nonviolent resistance. Most importantly, it proved that the British could no longer rule India against the will of its people. During World War II, Britain declared war on behalf of India without consulting Indian leaders. Gandhi and other leaders demanded immediate independence in exchange for India's support in the war. When the British refused, Gandhi launched the Quit India movement in 1942. Quit India was Gandhi's most radical campaign. He called on all Indians to do or die in their struggle for freedom. The movement spread like wildfire across the country. The British responded with massive repression, arresting nearly all Indian leaders, including Gandhi. Gandhi spent over 2 years in prison from 1942 to 1944. During this imprisonment, his beloved wife, Kasturba, died. Gandhi was heartbroken, but remained committed to nonviolence and truth. He continued to fast, pray, and maintain his principles even in the darkest moments. By 1945, it was clear that British rule in India was ending. World War II had weakened Britain economically and politically. The Indian independence movement had made the country ungovernable. The question was no longer whether India would become free, but how and when. However, independence came with a terrible price. Religious tensions between Hindus and Muslims had grown during the freedom struggle. Muslim leaders demanded a separate country, Pakistan. Gandhi opposed partition, believing that all Indians could live together in peace. Despite Gandhi's opposition, India was partitioned into two countries on August 15, 1947. India became independent, but millions of people had to leave their homes and migrate to the other side of new borders. Terrible violence erupted between different communities. Gandhi was heartbroken by the partition and violence. Instead of celebrating independence, he spent his time trying to stop communal riots. He fasted to bring peace between different communities. Even in his late 70s, he walked through dangerous areas, risking his life to promote harmony. On January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was walking to his evening prayer meeting in New Delhi. As usual, hundreds of people had gathered to pray with him. As he approached the prayer ground, a young man named Nathuram Godse approached him. Godse was a Hindu extremist who blamed Gandhi for being too sympathetic to Muslims during partition. He pulled out a pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. Gandhi fell to the ground saying, "Hey Ram, oh God." The great soul had been killed by the very hatred and violence he had spent his life fighting against. Gandhi's assassination shocked the world. Millions of people mourned the loss of this extraordinary man, but his death also awakened many people to the dangers of hatred and extremism. It reminded the world why Gandhi's message of love and non-violence was so important. Mahatma Gandhi died on January 30th, 1948, but his ideas and methods continue to inspire people around the world. Martin Luther King Jr. used Gandhi's techniques in the American Civil Rights Movement. Nelson Mandela applied Gandhi's principles in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Today, Gandhi's ideas about truth, nonviolence, simple living, and social justice remain as relevant as ever. In a world torn by conflict, his message of peace resonates strongly. In an age of materialism, his simple lifestyle offers an alternative vision. In times of injustice, his methods provide a way to fight without becoming what we oppose. Gandhi once said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." This simple but profound statement captures the essence of his philosophy. He believed that personal transformation was the foundation of social change. We cannot create a better world until we become better people ourselves. He also said, "Truth never damages a cause that is just." Throughout his life, Gandhi proved that honesty, even when difficult, was always the right choice. He showed that moral authority was more powerful than political or military power. Perhaps most importantly, Gandhi demonstrated that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things. He was not born wealthy or powerful. He had no army, no weapons, no political office for most of his life. Yet he brought down an empire and inspired millions of people through the simple power of truth and love. This concludes our journey through the life of Mahatma Gandhi. From a shy, frightened boy in Porbandar to the great soul who freed a nation, Gandhi's life shows us what is possible when we commit ourselves to truth and nonviolence. His story teaches us that every great change begins with a single person having the courage to stand up for what is right. It reminds us that love is stronger than hatred, truth more powerful than lies, and nonviolence more effective than force. Gandhi's life continues to echo through time, inspiring new generations to work for justice, peace, and human dignity. His message is simple but revolutionary. We can change the world, not through violence or hatred, but through love, truth, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Mahatma Gandhi. Remember, each of us has the power to create positive change in our own lives and communities. What echo will your life create? What change will you be in the world? This has been Lifelong Echoes. Until next time, may your life create echoes of truth, love, and hope that inspire others long after you are gone.